Hello, everyone, and welcome back for another Creative Minds. And today we are going to talk about globalization and how to be more local with globalization. Everything we do right now on the internet goes by definition global. So how is it that if you're doing a campaign that you want to be more localized, how do you do that? And I think this is going to be an interesting discussion today. And joining me again today is Stuart.
Hi, thanks for having me back again, Flavio. Really excited about this particular session because this is something that I've dealt with on a daily basis for a long time. So it'd be good to discuss how you best localize global campaigns.
And I think out of there, everybody has been really breaking their heads open on this one because by default, if you put it on social media, video marketing, podcasts, anything, it's global, but then reaching the people the right way makes it a little more difficult. And to help us today, we have a special guest that is joining us via video conference, which is the first time we do that, and I'm really excited about that. And it's somebody you used to work with.
Yeah, exactly. The gentleman we've asked to join us today is Mark Herten. He's a managing director of Publitek in Germany, and is also a good friend of mine. And I'm really looking forward to getting his insights on this particular topic because he's got a good lot of background and experience in this area.
Sounds wonderful. Mark, are you with us?
Yes, hello. Thanks for having me.
Wonderful, great. It's working. This is really cool. Mark, you are the managing director at Publitek for Germany, and can you tell us a little more about what is it you do and how it fits into global customers versus local markets?
Yes. So Publitek is a globally active B2B deep tech content marketing agency. And in my role as managing director in Germany, I help either international companies to access the German market, so to localize their global content, or the other way around, so to help German hidden gems and mid-sized companies to internationalize or globalize their marketing campaigns.
And I think this is the interesting part, right? Companies come to you, and they might come. I'll take because we're doing the broadcast in English. I'll just take an English example. An American company or a UK-based company comes and says, "I want to do some marketing campaigns in Europe," and how do those fit together? And Mark, the question is, from a language standpoint, from a communication standpoint, how do you approach this?
Yes, there are several ways to approach this. So I think as a global marketing manager, you always have to find the right balance between spendings and outcome. So obviously the minimum would be that you do a translation of the content for the key markets that you address. But if there are really important markets, and Germany is quite often selected as one of the most important markets because of its industry role and position in the global market, then it's even worth considering to do transcreation rather than only pure translation.
And you just said a word there I want to really highlight. It's transcreation. Can you qualify this a little more?
Yes, so you would take a genuine translation and then look what actually the basic original English content wants to say, or what messages does it want to bring across. And then you take a German technical writer and he rewrites it in a German way as a native German speaker would do it, taking the same messages, but creating a completely different text.
And I think that, Stuart, this is the interesting part. You're also multilingual, like most of us on this today on the episode. There are some specific expressions that go, or specific ways of saying something from a language to another. And from a scripting standpoint, it just doesn't translate. It doesn't compute, right? I know I have a book at home which is like French to English, and it says the name of the book is Ciel mon mari, which translates into Sky my husband, which is like that would be like, oh dear my husband, or something like this coming through the door. And I know that you had a funny expression when we talked about this on the social media for this episode.
That's right, yeah. So there's lots of idioms in every language, and the nice thing about idioms is that they are able to express things that you can't really express in another way. But often that language is unique to that language and it can't be used elsewhere in the same way. So the one we used was a common German phrase, which is, my English is not the yellow from the egg. And that obviously, if I translate it word for word, it doesn't really make any sense, but you can understand maybe where it's coming from. So if I have that phrase, which may be of some value in a particular marketing text, I can't leave that in and translate it exactly like that. I probably need to find another idiom. And I think that's what Mark is also highlighting with the term transcreation, that it's not about translating word for word, it's also about translating the intent of the message and getting that across as well. And when we also look at various original language material such as that comes from America, the UK, Australia and New Zealand, they're big sporting nations. They love to use sporting idioms like knock it out of the park, hit a home run, kick it in the back of the net. And if you're trying to then use that phrase or terminology or idiom in language and translate it, that's not really going to have the same impact. And idioms also are not necessarily widely known in other languages and other cultures. So people may be sitting there and they're wondering to themselves, well, is this a positive attribute or is this a negative attribute? I'm not really sure. So you have to be very careful.
And this is, I think, amazing to me, because marketing is about communication. And if we're not able to connect with the audience, we're missing the point. Right?
Yeah,
so
precisely.
it just doesn't work anymore. I mean, for somebody who's paying for marketing, or regardless if this is advertising, placement, even the work being done, if it doesn't click together. Mark, from your experience, I mean, I know that you are very much into the technical side. How do you say that different regions work in different ways about how they accept translations, or do they have different ways of what the expectations are between translations?
I wouldn't say they all have the same expectation, that it sounds like a native speaker would have written it, and this is never the case. So there is quite some potential for deception here, because the people that approves it locally quite often has not been involved in developing the original content. Hasn't been involved in developing the original content, and B, the translation never sounds like a native speaker would have written it. So usually it is really difficult to satisfy people when it comes to translation. So I wouldn't say that there are many differences in the different countries when it comes to the quality, but obviously there are differences, for example, in the copy length, in the writing style, in the style, what kind of formats. For example, Germany is really print heavy and likes long copy. So these are more the differences that come into play when transcreating copy.
And I think this is the other interesting part is that in social media, for example, there's a character count, or there's or into placement, you have a given amount of space available to play around. And so when you have different expectations about how people translate the content or transcreate the content, then it creates some elements that are maybe a little, I would say, weird. I know that, Stuart, you did some statistics about how languages, translations rather, fit from a language to another. And I think that's interesting. So let's look first at the information about the number of words, because I think this is interesting. So tell us more about what you found.
Yeah, so when I was working for Publitek and we were working with clients, we'd often define a word length for an article or for a white paper. So a typical technical article for a magazine would be specified to have 1,200 words. So what I wanted to do was take what I felt was a representative technical text that I would give to a magazine, and I translated it in DeepL into different languages. So obviously we don't quite know if the translation is perfect, but all the same, it gives us a rough feeling for how long those texts ended up. And the interesting thing was translating that English text into German and into Polish actually resulted in a lower word count than we'd actually started with, which for people who know the German language was probably a bit of a surprise. So anywhere between about 5 to 10% lower number of words. But looking at French, Spanish and Italian, we had anywhere between sort of 10 and 20% increase in word count.
And that doesn't add the gestures and everything associated with that, right?
Well, exactly. Within Italian, yeah, we have to also account for the room for the waving of the arms.
But this is the interesting part is the fact that so now if you have a word count, some applications, if you take Twitter for example, they would have a character count.
Yes.
And there, I mean, my German is not fantastic, but it's amazing to me that one word can be like 15 letters in there. And so there comes the other flip side of the coin.
Exactly, and that's where perhaps a little bit more creativity is required when you're translating words and phrases for those shorter, more condensed medium. So again, with this same text, it was a particular character count, if I recall correctly, it was about 10,000 characters. And what's interesting to note as well is that German magazines all work with a character count. If you get a request from a German magazine, they'll say they want 10,000 characters. So rather than having a word count. Looking at the word count, if we then translate it into those same European languages again, what we see is that for German and Polish, the character count has actually increased by 10 to 15% over the original English version. And in French and Spanish, we're almost by 20% more characters than we had in English. So that's a challenge with social media when you're trying to get all your text above the line in LinkedIn, for example, or a Twitter message out and keep it condensed. It sometimes requires a lot of so origami with the words in order to translate it into a different language, because you've got to be really compact and get your message across in very few words, because the character limit and the length of letters required to impart something. Looking then at Asian languages, we've got Japanese and Chinese I also looked at as well. Obviously, for those languages, there isn't a word count available as we have in European languages, but Japanese actually came out at around 50% less characters, and Chinese actually ended up with 2/3 number of characters.
Quite efficient.
Which is quite efficient. And you must also remember in both Japanese and Chinese, many words in a technical document often actually don't get translated at all. So some of those are actually English words, such as brand names, company names, and maybe certain types of components and things like that.
That's good information. Information. And you touched on one thing, and back to Mark, when it comes to the discussion regarding I would say communities or regionalities, that could be about specific holidays or specific habits or traditions that fit into that. How does this work, Mark, on your side when you have text? I mean, I know that we're mostly talking about technical text here, but there is still a difference about how people from a regional standpoint would receive text, and in some cases even the fact that they might work on different days of the week. Mark, how do you compute that?
Yes, so this is even more challenging probably because, again, especially if we take social media, the aim of the global marketing manager is rather to have only a few platforms, even only one global platform, or to at least reuse the global content. But when it comes to localization, so a German account, for example, you have the time differences. Obviously, you have different public holidays. If it's a Christian-dominated country or Muslim-dominated country, you have, for example, Saudi Arabia work on Sundays, or you have the Southern European countries that is more or less closed the whole summer in July and August. And the Germans, for example, it's also a question of tone. If you take the quite bold or more promotional tone of US copy that we see quite often, the Germans, especially the technical audience, tends to prefer more precise and neutral in tone content. So there are many things to consider, and there can be really some language traps, if you want, or imagery traps as well. If you take images that are not well perceived in a country, for example, nudity or other religious, at least cautious topics.
Yeah, we've seen lately in the news some things about that, and I don't want to go into the details, but this is true. that there are sensitivities from countries to another also because, for example, I mean, we're coming now here in Europe to the Christmas time.
Yeah.
And we assume that Christmas is with snow. I mean, go to Australia, obviously they don't have that.
No,
That
exactly,
Christmas
yeah.
time is more on the hot side.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we assume that everybody celebrates Christmas. Not true. Even in Europe itself, not everybody celebrates Christmas, right? There are other holidays that go alongside with that have to be respected. So it is kind of interesting when we touch a global channel like social media, video marketing like we're doing right now, anything that's a Vimeo or YouTube, there is an element of sensitivity that has to be looked at. And in many cases, you cannot really say that this video is done for people in France or people in, I don't know, in Turkey or people in Africa or people in South Africa or anything. I mean, anybody has access to the content in most cases, right? Depending on how the copyrights and the access is to the internet. And so it creates this notion of always having a second thought about what if somebody reads that the wrong way? What could happen?
Yeah, I think that's one of the values of having somebody like Mark and a marketing agency with that worldwide global perspective on board and in your team. They work with all these different magazines on a daily basis. They work globally on a daily basis, and they can inform you and share that insight and knowledge that they have about those sensitivities and the way those particular markets work, or what works, what doesn't. And it ranges really from, as we've already spoken about, the religious perspective, maybe imagery and superstition, right down to what days of the week people work, whether people prefer online or print, and how people work and operate on social media. We are very much used to using Twitter, for example, all the time, but that's not the case, for example, in China. And in Russia, for example, there's other platforms like vKontakty and so on that are maybe more popular and more broadly used.
And for sure, I mean, this topic is going to come back on our agenda a few other times because we need to talk about what are the right tools to broadcast into other regions. Not all the regions are using the same platforms. What are the right platforms to use even for social media? So there's way more. I mean, this topic by far this is not the last time you heard about this one.
No.
There's a whole lot to talk about. I think maybe just the last thing for Mark before he goes back to his duties is there a way to put a disclaimer or something that says, sorry if I offended you, it was not meant to be, anything like this, Mark?
I don't know. I don't think so. And I think going by really developing globally valid content and marketing strategies is the better way than to work with disclaimers, I guess. And a topic or a point that we didn't touch on yet is also the different level of awareness, either of the company itself. So if you are a US market leader, this doesn't mean that in Germany anybody cares about you. And the same goes for topic relevance. So if we take, for example, safety, so rail safety, we had that example recently. In Western Europe, you talk mainly about digitization and nuances and international or European standards and these kind of things. In countries like South Africa and India, you really have to start by building up the awareness that safety is important in the first place. So it's a completely different campaign that you have to run there for the exactly same topic.
Yes, and interesting enough, I mean, some brands or some companies rather have brands that are regional brands from a region to another to be able to address the people with those brands, and those brands are not global brands per se, but they are like associated brands. I mean, if you I read something, for example, about the ice cream market. They have all those different brands that are associated because also they have, in some cases, purchased local manufacturers and they kept the brand there to be able to associate themselves. And so it is a very valid point. And I'm sure, Mark, we're going to have another discussion about this. And we definitely are going to have to welcome you back on another episode because there's so much more about branding. How is it that to transfer the brand from a region to another? Yeah,
exactly. I think that there's an interesting point you made about the ice cream. It's and And it's the same with other internationally well-known brands like Apple, and even growing up in the UK, we used to talk about a Hoover, never a vacuum cleaner, and Hoover was a brand. So all of those things, if the market that you're trying to target associates a particular word or a term or a brand, a company with a particular item, then obviously many companies go down the path of acquiring that business, basically because they want to acquire the brand and grow within that area, because it's easier to sell to people who, for example, know Hoover than it is to sell to people who are just looking for a vacuum cleaner.
That's absolutely correct. And there are many examples about that. I know some in France, Post-it being another one, and things like this, where it has literally entered the vocabulary. Go Google that. That's another one.
Right.
So anyway, Mark, thank you very much for joining us today. It was really absolutely fantastic to have you on the line.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me, and good luck. And I was happy to premiere as your first external guest, so it worked out quite well.
Thank you. That we take that as a compliment, and that means that we're going to do it again. Thank you, Mark, and have a great day and be safe.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you. And so this topic by far is not the end. I mean, we have, in fact, pages. When we were preparing this, along with Stuart and Mark, we literally ended up having pages of examples of situations. And so expect a little more about this. We're coming to the end of this episode, and I must say it's been just fantastic to see the work that has been done here in the lab. The creative lab continues to move forward. Over the holidays, there's going to be some work being done to continue to promote the brand and the work that is being done here. And we are preparing, in fact, the next episode for January, where I think we're going to talk about startups and marketing, which I'm really excited about, because a lot of marketing companies are looking at how to attract startups and vice versa. Startups sometimes are very focused on their products and don't know really how to go about the marketing.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's one of the things you notice, especially amongst companies that are trying to develop an engineering type product, a very technical product, in the B2B area. The founders and the development team tend to be engineers and are very obsessed with their technology and their product, and rightly so, because that's how that product attains the quality expected and becomes a world-beating product. But the challenge there is that unless somebody's talking about it and sharing information about it, it's not really going to progress. And marketing is a really important aspect of that, but is often overlooked by those teams. And that is an enormous problem. Another element that I think we're going to have to look at is why that happens. And one of the reasons is obviously everybody wants the product to be perfect and finished in order to be able to launch it. And then going out there with, let's say, a PowerPoint presentation or a PowerPoint product, as it's often called, is sometimes considered not to be worthy. So it's a real challenge to get those teams together and to realize how important marketing is and what marketing can actually achieve.
It does. And in fact, interesting enough, I was just briefly looking, and I see Roman had put an interesting comment about the topic we had today. He said, fun fact, in cultures where more words are needed to give the same information, people are talking faster.
Yes,
this is an interesting thing.
Point, yeah.
I did not notice that, and so thank you for noting that. And this is part of the live discussion, right?
Super.
This is fantastic. Thank you very much for noting that. And we do that in English. We should speak a little slower.
Perhaps,
maybe. We will check on that for the next episode. And thank you, everybody, for being with us. Thank you, Stuart. And most of all, everybody be safe and be careful on what you do out there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we look forward to being back in the new year and take a little break before Christmas. That doesn't mean that nothing's going on in the background, because we work very hard behind the scenes, as Flavio already mentioned, to bring everything together, to define the topics and find participants. And obviously, if anyone wants to come along and join us, we'd be more than happy to hear from you and invite you along to talk about your specialism and your area of expertise.
Absolutely. And as you can see, it works quite well.
Yeah.
So looking forward to that. And for anybody out there, since this is a program that goes around the world, literally, regardless of the holidays that you are doing or the break that you are doing, enjoy, be safe, and we'll see you in 2021. Thank you very much.
Yeah, that was great.
This is it's